Hello church, and welcome to this week's reflection on Choose Life. This week I want to look at the 15th of September, where Simon challenged us and says, are you going to go into the skid or into the hedge? And the readings was from 1 Corinthians 15:58. Therefore, my dear brothers, stand firm. Let nothing move you. Always give yourselves fully to the work of the Lord, because you know that your labour in the Lord is not in vain. So first of all, just thinking about that scripture, to stand firm is a choice. Is something that I need to choose to do, and I'm conscious that I'm going to stand, and I'm going to stand firm. And then I'm going to choose to let nothing move me. So when something tries to move me, I'm going to actually push against it. And if it pushes me back, I'm going to step back into that same place again. Always give yourselves fully to the work of the Lord. Fully. I mean, again, this talks about, not being half-hearted about stuff for God. Actually, if I'm going to do something, I'm going to step in and do it. And Simon today is just trying to remind us that at times troubles will come, difficult times will come, and he uses the analogy of skidding. He says, or whether it be driving on ice, snow or silt, the natural response when entering a skid is to slam on the brakes and try to steer out of the skid. He's saying, but actually that's the worst thing you can do. When a skid comes, when troubles come, the worst thing you can try and do is to try and move away. Actually, the thing to do, which is counterintuitive, is to actually turn into the skid. Turn into the skid for safety. And he starts to say how challenges and troubles, it's not if they come for the Christian, it's when they come. And we looked at that, didn't we, on Sunday, when we looked at the man who built his house on the rock, or the man who built his house on the sand. And we knew which one stood, the one that was built firmly on the rock, and that was a metaphor for building life on Jesus. And Simon reminds us that whenever we just start to make a way forward in our spiritual walk, whenever we start to think, right, I'm going to get serious for God, the enemy does not like it. And he'll do whatever he can to try and slow us down or slip us up. Sometimes it's something he did in our lives 10 or 15 years ago that's not been dealt with, but is still there now. And the minute we seem to make a step forward, our mind kicks in, fear kicks in, doubt kicks in, and we pull back. Simon is encouraging us to press in to the skid, press into God, press into the things of God when troubles come. I've heard so many times as a church pastor, people say, I'm just going to pull back from church for a bit. I'm going through a few things and I need to work them out with God. I sometimes just scratch my head. So the church, the place of support, love and security, you want to pull away from for a bit while you sort things out. See, the enemy loves to isolate us. We've all seen those David Attenborough programs where you've got a herd of buffalo and the lions are circling them and they're looking for someone who is ill or old or young, and they're going to seek to isolate them away from the rest of the herd so they're easy to pick off. The enemy does that. Satan does that the same. He plays into our fears and our doubts, and he looks for someone who's not quite sure, and he'll just look to siphon and separate us off. And then we're all on our own, and we're not surprised actually when we're overcome by the enemy and he gets us. And that might look like, actually, I'm no longer going to take that step forward. That idea I had to move forward in God, I don't know if it was really me. I'm just going to stay where I am. I'm just going to go back to my normal routines. Or, do you know what? I just don't want to open up to people in my church about this. So I'm going to pull away from a bit so I don't kind of feel, until this feeling has subsided and I don't feel that need, and then I'll come back in and I'll enter on. And Simon's saying, no, in those times, steer into the challenge, steer into the pain, steer into the skid. He speaks of Paul. He says, how often are we told in the Bible not to be afraid? Paul was a supreme example of overcoming adversity and not being put off by rapidly deteriorating circumstances. He then says, and when things went badly for him, he dug even deeper. Again, it reminds me of Sunday when we looked at that story of the man that built his house on the rock. In the NIV, it says in the Gospel of Luke, the wise man dug down deep, working to get to the solid rock that we know was a metaphor for Jesus. And when we build our life on Jesus, when we dig down deep in those harder times, we'll overcome all sorts of adversities, all sorts of troubles, all sorts of challenges. We'll learn to steer into the skid and make it through. And he says this, he, that's been Paul, increased the prayers and was determined not to be intimidated by life's circumstances. Paul often would turn into the skid, and Simon is encouraging us, don't turn to the hedge, turn into the skid. Church, in difficult times, let's do that. Let's not pull back. Let us press through. Let's reach out to people in our triplets, in our home groups, in our church, and talk and share about some of the challenges we're having and push on through in Jesus. Church, have a great day. Bye for now.